Everyone thought the woman crying in the second row was a heckler, but Johnny Carson knew better. He walked off the stage, knelt at her feet, and whispered 5 words that reduced a nation to tears. Behind the glitz of Hollywood was a 40-year-old secret involving a Nebraska farmhouse and a man named George who never missed a monologue. It was not a heckler or dropped glass. It was something persistent, profoundly human. The quiet, steady sound of an adult woman weeping. Johnny, the master of controlled chaos, the puppeteer of the American public's mood, tried to glide over it. He delivered the punchline, but the laughter felt forced, brittle, because the weeping had not stopped. Ed McMahon looked up, his genial smile dissolving, confused. The studio audience turned toward the second row, where the sound emanated. A low, uneasy murmur began to ripple through the packed seats. The air seemed to thicken, suddenly heavy and unbreathable. Every smile in the room instantly curdled into shared discomfort. The atmosphere shifted from a controlled party to an unsolicited vigil. The entire apparatus of late-night stardom felt suddenly cheap and irrelevant. For the audience at home, the moment was bewildering. The camera held tight on Johnny's smile, but the crew and producers knew the show had hit a wall. The sound booth was scrambling. The raw, emotional noise was impossible to filter. Carson could handle any crisis, but not genuine, unfiltered distress. It was the one emotion he had spent 3 decades guarding against, and now it had invaded his kingdom, paralyzing the machinery of network television. The professional veneer of late-night comedy was shattering in real time. The clock was ticking on millions of dollars of airtime, and the king was off script. The raw, high-fidelity sound of pure human sorrow was broadcast live and clear across the nation. In the control room, the director froze, hands hovering over the cut-to-commercial button, too stunned to act. The red light on the camera, a symbol of television authority, seemed to burn with unprecedented intensity. The executive producer, pale and sweating, signaled for a panic break, but the signal was lost in Johnny's gravitational pull. The weeping woman, Eleanor Vance, late 50s, modestly dressed, was not seeking attention. Her head was bowed, shoulders shaking, hands pressed over her mouth, trying to contain the sorrow. Clutched beneath her hands was a warm photograph. She was trying desperately to stop, knowing she was ruining the moment, but the grief, a private, terrible flood she had traveled 1,000 miles to escape, had finally caught up. The sound she made was less a cry and more a quiet, desperate surrender. Her small, shaking figure became the involuntary focal point of the entire production. She was the embodiment of every quiet, suffering soul watching television alone. Johnny skipped the next joke card. His legendary composure began to crack. His eyes, usually guarded and sharp, showed a flicker of vulnerability. He looked at Ed, whose trademark laugh was replaced by pity. Doc Severinsen and the band members put down their instruments. This was real life, crying in the middle of a joke. Producers in the booth frantically signaled for a commercial. Johnny ignored the whispers in his earpiece. He didn't even lift a hand to adjust the tiny receiver. He stood there, microphone loose, then took 2 slow steps toward the crying woman. His smile was gone, replaced by genuine concern. The studio dissolved into an intense, uncomfortable silence. It felt less like a television set and more like a church. All pretense of celebrity disappeared, leaving only the man in the suit. A single light fixture near the camera seemed to hum louder in the sudden quiet. The king of late night had stopped his magic act because someone was truly hurting. He looked down at Eleanor, tears soaking her dress, and gently spoke the one thing nobody expected. The entire atmosphere shifted. What he asked her, quietly and simply, wasn't about the show or the cameras. It was only about her, and a promise made to a man who hadn't missed the monologue in 40 years. The silence stretched, a fragile, momentous beat in broadcast history. It was the sound of 20 million people leaning forward, listening. He held the microphone out. In that fragile, charged quiet, the world waited to hear the secret she carried. The legendary deafening hush over The Tonight Show was broken only by the slight, rattling sound of Eleanor's choked sobs. All eyes were locked on the exchange between the most famous man on television and the woman whose profound sorrow had halted the entire production. Johnny knelt slightly, placing himself closer to Eleanor, an act of immediate compassion. He dropped to one knee, a gesture of unexpected humility that defied the elevated stage. He spoke again, his voice carrying the gentle warmth reserved for favorite guests. "Ma'am, I'm Johnny Carson. Can you tell me your name and tell me what's wrong? We can take a break, there's no hurry." Eleanor could only shake her head, burying her face. Producers ran to Ed, trying to get Johnny to stop. Carson, for once, was utterly oblivious to the chaos. He just waited, patient and steady. The 20 million Americans watching were witnessing something that simply did not happen on talk shows. They were seeing the mask fall away from the undisputed emperor of comedy. Finally, Eleanor looked up, her eyes wide, red, and lost. Tears had stripped her composure. "I know I shouldn't be making a scene. I'm so sorry, Mr. Carson. I didn't mean to, I had to be here." Carson took another step. "Had to be here, Eleanor? Why?" He wasn't pressing, he was inviting. He stepped entirely out of his spotlight, offering her his genuine attention. Eleanor finally spoke the words that had traveled 1,000 miles. "My husband, George," she said, the name shattering her voice. He completed his journey a few months ago." The audience collectively gasped. It was a raw, sympathetic wave that crashed over the studio. "We were going to come together. We saved for years. This show, it was his whole life, our ritual. He wanted to see you live more than anything." Clutching the photograph, she delivered the reason she traveled alone. "I came alone because I felt like, if I sat here, maybe he could still see the show. Maybe he's still watching tonight through my eyes." The air thickened with sudden empathy. This was a widow completing a sacred pilgrimage for the love she had profoundly shared, and now experienced the absence of her partner. Ed McMahon wiped a tear away. Doc and the band were visibly moved. Her grief had transformed the glitzy set into a solemn, almost holy space dedicated to George from Nebraska, who just loved to laugh. Carson looked at the seat beside her, his face reflecting her sorrow. He knew the show could not go on until this deeply personal secret was given dignity. It was a moment not for comedy, but for grace. The cameras were still rolling, capturing the unprecedented sight of a man whose job was to make the world laugh, now holding focus on human sadness. Carson quietly made a decision that would redefine that night. He needed to hear more about George, the man whose simple joy had brought his widow to tears. If this story has touched you, and you want to see how Johnny Carson handles this heartbreaking situation, hit that subscribe button right now and join us for more stories about the hidden heart behind Hollywood's biggest legends. The television lights faded. The studio audience, still reeling, watched as the scene shifted 1,000 miles eastward to the quiet, wind-swept life of a Nebraska farmhouse. This was the world of George and Eleanor Vance, where the biggest excitement arrived promptly at 11:30 in the evening. George Vance was defined by hard work, 40 years working the same land, hands permanently calloused. Life on the farm held dignity. At the end of every demanding day, after the cows were fed, George had a ritual. He would sink into his worn armchair, waiting for the iconic fanfare of Doc Severinson's band. He was a man of few words, but his devotion to this nightly routine spoke volumes about his quiet contentment. He was the heart of the home, a solid man whose presence was as reliable as the sunset. For George and Eleanor, The Tonight Show was a promise that no matter the harsh weather or low crop yields, Johnny Carson would be there, delivering a guaranteed laugh. It was their sacred moment of connection, transcending worries. They sat side by side, finding solace in the reliable presence of the man in the suit. George loved the monologue, finding cynical joy in Carson's pointed jabs. Then, 5 months before Eleanor found herself crying in that studio seat, the quiet routine shattered. George was taken suddenly. One morning he was there, the next He had departed. A swift illness claimed him before they could say goodbye, before they could take that California trip planned for their 50th anniversary. Eleanor was alone in a profound silence. The silence of the house was a physical weight. She found herself listening to the clock tick, a brutal replacement for George's gentle snoring. The world seemed hollowed out, save for the memory of his laugh. The hardest part was 11:30 at night. Eleanor tried the ritual, but the music was unbearable. The empty space in the armchair felt like a physical ache. Sometimes, she would switch the television off immediately, unable to face the man who had reliably brought joy while sitting next to a silent, cold space. Eleanor knew George would have wanted her to go on that trip, to finally feel the electric energy he had only experienced through a screen. She felt a profound duty to fulfill that last shared dream. It was an act of love, a final conversation with her soulmate. She was carrying his final wish like a brittle glass bird. So Eleanor drove, taking George's worn photograph, convinced that if she sat there, George would somehow be sitting there too. She kept her composure through the drive and the wait, but the minute the camera focused on Johnny, the dam broke. It was the realization that George was not there, that the shared joy was permanently severed, that sent her into that uncontrollable spiral of grief. Back in the studio, Johnny Carson, still kneeling, understood with chilling clarity. This was not a fan seeking an autograph. This was a woman mourning a beautiful, simple life, and he, the host, had been the silent third partner in a 40-year love story. He looked at the photograph she held, which he knew would contain the key to understanding this entire interruption. Johnny Carson knelt there, oblivious to the panic of the production team and the silence of the millions watching. All that mattered was Eleanor and the worn object she gripped, the small window into the love story that had just halted the biggest show on television. "Eleanor," Johnny said softly, "you're holding something. Is that George?" Slowly, reverently, Eleanor brought the photograph forward. Encased in a thick plastic sleeve, it was a faded color snapshot. The image showed George, seated in his armchair, looking past the camera with an amused smile. Behind him, on the screen, was the familiar Tonight Show set. This photo was a captured ritual, the last known view of George's contented joy. Eleanor's voice, though rough with tears, carried a heartbreaking clarity. "He loved this picture. We took it the night he told me we finally had enough saved for the trip. He said he wanted a picture of himself in his favorite place, watching his favorite man." She pressed the picture against her cheek. When he passed away suddenly, I made sure to bring it. I wanted George to be here, in the place that made him laugh the most. Carson took the photograph. He didn't just glance, he studied it. The ordinary living room, the dignity of the man, the glow of the screen. He was looking at 40 years of loyalty. He saw the empty seat beside Eleanor. Johnny Carson understood he wasn't talking to an audience member. He was talking to a surrogate, a messenger of deep love. The image of George's simple, happy face was a mirror reflecting Carson's own purpose. He felt a sudden, profound connection to the countless faces he entertained in the dark. The photo was a powerful, silent testimonial that demanded respect. The man in the photograph, George, had become the most important star in the room. Carson knew then that this single viewing ritual was worth more than a dozen celebrity interviews. The camera zoomed in on Carson's face, catching the shift of emotion, profound sadness mixed with humbling gratitude. He held the photo for a long moment, the world witnessing the king of late night confronted by the quiet power of a broken heart. He realized Eleanor wasn't seeking celebrity, she was seeking closure for George, needing to complete their final step. As he handed the photo back, his fingers briefly brushed Eleanor's. "He has a kind face, Eleanor," Carson whispered, his own voice thick. He looked at the empty space. He must have been a wonderful man. Carson stood up slowly. He had absorbed the grief. Now he had to transition back into the theater of laughter. He knew moving on would be a betrayal. He had to honor George, and the only way to honor a life defined by laughter was to make Eleanor, and perhaps George, smile again. If George's story resonated with you, and you believe in the power of shared laughter, drop a comment below and tell us about a simple, cherished ritual you shared with someone you love. In a split-second decision, Johnny Carson signaled the stage manager, not for a commercial, but for an adjustment. He pointed to the guest chair and then to Eleanor. The show was not stopping. It was transforming. A stagehand wheeled the elegant velvet armchair down to the second row. Carson, host of Presidents and Movie Stars, sat down. He was out in the open, eye level with a grieving woman. This was an act of profound vulnerability, turning The Tonight Show into an intimate, unscripted therapy session viewed by 20 million people. The audience understood they were about to witness the true Carson. The silence in the studio was electric with anticipation. Every microphone, every light, was now focused on a single moment of compassion. The boundary between the stage and the seats had vanished. "Eleanor," Johnny began, his voice barely above conversational level, "I think we all need to know a little more about George, because tonight, he's our most important guest." Eleanor, stunned but encouraged, started to talk. She spoke of George's simple kindness, their life, and what the nightly ritual truly meant. "He said you were his escape," Eleanor confessed. "He said you were the one person who could make him forget the hail and the tractor bills for 20 minutes. Carson nodded, reflecting deep empathy. "And what did he laugh at, Eleanor? What was George's favorite kind of joke?" Eleanor managed a tiny smile. "Oh, the silly stuff. The jokes about Ed McMahon and his lifestyle, and the really bad political observations. He said he liked it when you got away with something you shouldn't have." Carson leaned in, his expression softening. He shared a private story. "You know, Eleanor," he said, "my own father, he was a quiet man too. He didn't give away a lot of emotion, but I remember watching him laugh at the radio when I was a kid. Just a simple, genuine, exhausted laugh. I never forgot that sound. I always hoped I could give someone that same release." Eleanor watched him, tears welling, not from sadness, but recognition. "You're just a man too, Mr. Carson," she whispered, validating his vulnerability. The admission was a heavy weight lifted from his famous shoulders. The audience was transfixed. Carson had never been so open, so free of his constructed persona. He had revealed the heart of the performer, the need to connect, to heal, to matter. He wasn't talking about ratings. He was talking about the fundamental dignity of a shared laugh. Carson had transformed the high-pressure studio into a humble Nebraska living room. He was no longer the king of late night. He was just a man sharing memory. The interview was derailed, and now he had to bring it back to the very thing George loved: laughter. Carson looked into Eleanor's eyes. The time for tears was almost over. It was time to honor George properly, by giving Eleanor the gift her husband had waited 40 years for. A joke delivered just for them. Johnny Carson paused, leaning toward Eleanor. He gently suggested that if George were really present, and everyone felt he was, he wouldn't want her dwelling on sorrow. He would want her doing the one thing they shared every night: laughing. "Eleanor, you said George loved the silly political ones, the jokes that let him feel like he was getting away with something," Carson reminded her, eyes twinkling. "He'd want you to laugh right now. He'd insist on it." Eleanor nodded, a deep, shuddering breath replacing her sobs. "He always told me, if Johnny can make fun of Congress, then the bills can wait until morning." Carson smiled, a genuine, private smile. He launched into an unscripted joke, tailor-made for George. "I heard a new report came out today," Carson began, pacing and delivery flawless, saying the economy is doing so poorly, even the guy who sells hot dogs outside of NBC is asking for a 3-year loan. He said he's thinking of switching careers. He's going to try selling un-hot dogs. It was a simple, corny joke, but the context transformed it. It was delivered with sincerity, dedicated to a man who loved cheap jokes. Eleanor didn't just chuckle. A genuine, watery bubble of laughter escaped her. It was fragile, rough, but real. She covered her mouth, embarrassed, but the tears that followed were lighter, cleansing. She looked at Carson, a spark of George's joy shining through her grief. The audience reacted with a collective sigh of relief. The tension broke. Doc Severinsen, without being prompted, began to play a soft, spontaneous jazz riff that perfectly underscored the quiet dignity of the moment. Carson had successfully completed the ritual. He had brought the laughter George expected and invited George back into the room. He had performed a comedy of remembrance, proving that the true power of television was in the power to connect with one solitary soul in pain. The job was finished. Carson stood up, offering Eleanor his hand. The laughter had been the pivot. Now it was time for the profound conclusion. He had honored George, and now he had to give her the ultimate validation. This delicate moment of shared laughter had restored dignity to Eleanor, but Johnny Carson was about to deliver 5 words that would change the atmosphere of the entire studio, confirming that George was indeed present. If you want to know the 5 words that left the audience in tears, keep watching. Johnny Carson stood, extending his hand to Eleanor, his unflappable demeanor dissolved. He had just delivered a joke for a single, grief-stricken widow. He gently helped Eleanor up, his eyes shining. He took the photograph one last time, holding it up slightly. "This photograph," Carson said, his voice husky with emotion, "is not just a picture of a man watching television. It's a testament to loyalty, to simplicity, and to the quiet kind of love that lasts forever." He looked directly into the lens, addressing the millions who had witnessed the derailment. With tears gathering, Johnny Carson spoke the 5 words that dissolved professional barriers. "George is still watching tonight." The studio erupted in an authentic, visceral wave of emotion. People were weeping openly. The audience, the cameraman, the boom operator. Even Ed McMahon was seen struggling, tears streaming down his face as he gave a choked nod. Carson had validated Eleanor's pilgrimage, confirming her love, and George's presence was real and important. It was the greatest tribute Carson could offer, a shared belief in the permanence of joy. He handed the photograph back. Eleanor clutched it, her face transformed from sorrow to grateful peace. She felt the cool plastic of the sleeve, solid proof of her completed mission. Carson, wiping his eyes, turned slightly to Ed. Ed, battling emotions, reached for his microphone. He was supposed to launch the credits, but instead he stood up, walking toward the stage, voice thick with sincerity. He spoke quietly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a very special night. The Tonight Show will be right back." Ed had dropped his professional cue entirely, making his sincerity the final, powerful visual beat before the fade. The moment before the commercial was the most honest, unscripted display of pure humanity ever witnessed on the show. It was about a simple promise, a promise of laughter, kept across 1,000 miles and beyond the end of life. It was the heart of the Tonight Show, revealed at last. For the millions watching at home, the sudden emotional sincerity was a shockwave. As the orchestra, led by a tearful Doc Severinsen, played Beautiful Dreamer, the cameras faded, leaving the profound image of Carson holding Eleanor's hand. The moment was instantly indelible, broadcast into the homes of millions who would never forget the night the king wept. It was a shared, collective moment of national vulnerability. And just before the screen went black, a single close-up shot captured the unshed tear clinging to Johnny's lower lash line. The show was in a commercial break, but for Johnny, the performance had just begun. He knew he couldn't simply send Eleanor back with a handshake. The gift of those 5 words demanded a deeper, private action. The instant the camera lights faded, the studio floor dissolved into chaotic hum. Stagehands scrambled to reset lights while producers tried to regain control of the schedule. But Johnny Carson, ignoring celebrity guests, didn't move from Eleanor's side. He ushered her gently into a quiet production office. This was the moment the cameras missed, the private epilogue revealing his true, compassionate core. He wanted Eleanor to understand his words were a commitment. Carson sat her down, offering water. He dismissed everyone, insisting on privacy. "Eleanor," he said, voice personal, "thank you for trusting me with your story. You drove all the way from Nebraska, alone. You should not have to spend tonight in a humble hotel room worrying about the drive back." Carson called his personal assistant. Eleanor's plans were instantly changed. Carson arranged a suite in a 5-star hotel near the beach. He instructed his assistant to cover all expenses, room, meals, and a first-class train ticket back. I want you to stay for 3 days, he told her softly. See the ocean, take a walk. George planned this trip, and you deserve to finish it. As Eleanor tried to express gratitude, Carson waved his hand. No, Eleanor. This is between me and George. He bought the ticket. I'm just making sure you get the best seat in the house. He retrieved a small pen, signing the original draft of his opening monologue. He handed it to her. This is the monologue I didn't get to finish, he joked. Take it. And whenever you read it, remember that George managed to stop the show, and that's a power even I never had. He looked at her, expression serious. You don't tell anyone about this, Eleanor. This is just for you. This is the real thank you, not the one on television. He looked her in the eye and said, if anyone asks, tell them I was kind. But the details, those belong only to you and to George. Carson had given her history, comfort, and closure. He had given her back, her dignity, and her purpose. Eleanor Vance, the quiet widow, left that office not just with a photograph, but with the knowledge that the man who made her husband smile had seen their love, honored their ritual, and quietly, irrevocably, changed her life forever. Something fundamental in Carson had shifted, impacting his life long after the lights dimmed. He realized the depth of his responsibility to the viewers in the dark. The story of Eleanor Vance and the halted monologue became television legend, but the true impact was the quiet, hidden commitment Carson made to the spirit of George. Eleanor returned to Nebraska, heart lighter. She kept her promise, never speaking of the private suite or the train ticket. Johnny Carson is a very kind man. He saw me, she told neighbors. A few months after the broadcast, an anonymous donation was made to a local community center in Eleanor's town, large enough to establish a permanent endowment for local arts. The money was to sponsor a free annual community movie night, showcasing classic comedies. The fund was named in honor of a loyal viewer. No one knew where it came from, but it provided a permanent source of simple joy George Vance had valued. Johnny Carson, the king of late night, had established his own private, silent foundation dedicated to quiet acts of kindness. This foundation, established by one of the richest men in entertainment, focused on small, highly specific grants in remote towns, creating a powerful contrast to his public life. His colleagues noticed a subtle shift. He became warmer, more genuine, less guarded. Ed McMahon, who knew the full extent of the gesture, kept the secret, once remarking, "After that night, Johnny was a good man." That woman, Eleanor, reminded him that his job wasn't just to be a star, it was to be a comfort. The Eleanor Vance story was the hidden compass for the rest of Carson's career. His success was no longer measured by ratings, but by the quiet knowledge that he had honored one ordinary, faithful viewer. It redefined his connection to the small-town America he secretly cherished. The stage was still his, but the audience had changed. Even as the years passed, there was one final moment where the secret almost broke through Carson's legendary privacy, right before he stepped away forever. May 22nd, 1992, the final taping of The Tonight Show. The air was thick with historic emotion as the king of late night prepared to deliver his last sign-off to 20 million viewers. As Johnny offered his final, heartfelt words, his gaze swept the audience, lingering on every face. Then, his eyes caught one specific empty seat in the second row, the exact spot Eleanor Vance had sat 9 years earlier. The camera caught the flicker of memory, a private, profound acknowledgement of the moment that truly changed him. He ended his final address with the sentiment George and Eleanor had taught him, that he would miss the connection, the chance to be there for people who simply needed a laugh. The show faded. The cheers were deafening. The secret of Eleanor's visit remained, buried deep. The truth only emerged after Carson completed his time here in 2005. Among his papers, documentation detailed the small, quiet foundation in Nebraska. The documents confirmed Eleanor Vance's name, specifying the money was for the benefit of loyal viewers who found solace in shared laughter. It was the final written proof of the silent promise he made. The entire event solidified a simple truth. Carson learned that his biggest accomplishments weren't the Emmy Awards, They were the moments he forgot he was on television and acted as a man offering comfort. The 5 words he spoke, "George is still watching tonight," were the core of his legacy. They meant every person sitting alone at home mattered. The love shared by George and Eleanor was worthy of stopping the world's biggest show. Eleanor, who watched that final sign-off, never reached out again, honoring her promise. But Carson ensured her husband's quiet love of laughter echoed forever. Johnny Carson stopped the show for a crying lady, and in doing so, showed the world the real meaning of his stardom, the profound ability to recognize and validate the worth of one single grieving soul. The king of late night had met his hero, and his hero was a quiet man from Nebraska who knew how to find joy in the simple things. Johnny Carson proved that night that the greatest stage in the world is the one we build between each other. If this tribute to Johnny, Eleanor, and George moved you, please give this video a chance to help us share more stories of human connection. To join our community and never miss a journey through the hidden heart of history, click that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching, and remember, your story matters just as much as the legends we walk among.